Good afternoon. Welcome to our latest Facebook Live at clearancejobs.com. Thank you so much for joining us all on Facebook. Thank you to Jeff Bennett, who wrote the Insider's Guide to the Security Clearance Process. And Jeffrey, you've also contributed to the Clearance Job site for years. I want to say a decade or more, probably, because I've been with the company about 10 years, and I'm pretty sure you might predate me in your relationship with clearancejobs.com. So thank you again for always being a wealth of information about the security clearance process.
Thank you, Lindy. It's an honor to be here. I've been there for a while. I've been working. I remember Eric was there before you, and he told me about you, and we continued our relationship. And I'm honored to be here, and I'm really, really honored that you asked me to come on this venue and featured my book. I appreciate that.
Yeah. Well, again, it was our July book club book for clearancejobs.com, The Insider's Guide to the Clearance Process. It flew off the shelves. We gave away 10 hard copies to folks who responded, sent them a nice squirrel poster to go along with it. And it just goes to show how much information really is needed about the clearance process, how many people have questions about that. And I like the book because, it contains a lot of information, but you talked in the beginning kind of about how this book came to be. So can you kind of describe what made you decide to write the book in the first place?
Yeah, of course, I've been writing other books. I started out writing security certification books, and then as people started reading, they started sending me questions about the security clearance process. And I was actually on a security radio show where people were asking me about the security clearance process, but more important, they were picking at me because they couldn't believe that the U.S. government would release classified information to civilians. They had no clue of the oversight, and I couldn't get a word in edgewise. I tried to correct them, and I couldn't. I said, if I put it in a book, people actually give me a chance to talk. So,
Yeah.
So that's funny. And there are a lot of there's a lot of misinformation and misunderstandings about security clearances. And I wrote this for a couple of reasons. One is never let your past prevent you from applying for a security clearance job. Don't let your lack of understanding prevent you from applying for that job. And most of all, don't let the fact that you don't have a clearance prevent you from applying for a security clearance job, or even expanding the clearance to facility clearances if you want to bid on a classified contract. Don't let the fact that you don't have a security clearance stop you from that, because there are processes in place.
Yeah, we kind of wrote about that recently. We had an op-ed about not weeding yourself out of the security clearance process that tied into kind of the marijuana policies and rules are coming up for a lot more applicants. And the issue is, like we talked about, there is a whole person concept. So it's not a good idea to just assume I have no chance at obtaining a security clearance. But you really, I thought you have a lot of great information here, just that it's important to be aware of the process too, because I'm always surprised at how people who even apply for clearance jobs don't realize what a security clearance is, what it means, the duties behind it. So again, what kind of information do you include in the book that's relevant for those applicants why should they read it if they don't understand the clearance process yet?
Yeah, when I try to address it to those folks who might be looking for work in the security clearance sector, and I really focus on, if you have a valuable skill that a clear defense contractor or the government needs, they will hire you for that skill. If you don't have the clearance yet, it is possible that they will put you in a job that you can work while they wait for that security clearance to come through. And so that's always the encouragement that I like to give. And I always like to also help FSOs, because I get a lot of calls from FSOs and from lawyers, believe it or not, who had experiences where security personnel did what you said, weeded out people who they thought couldn't get a clearance. And I was like, no, that's not your role. And so I try to walk the applicant through the process of getting the security clearance, as well as who will read their SF-86, their application, what the FSO's role is as they read it. They're going to help them make sure it's filled out completely and accurately, but it's up to them to get it. And what I like to do is kind of, if you're thinking about a clearance and you're very serious about it, why not start working on your SF-86 right now? And because it says it's about a 90-minute process to fill it out, 90 to 120 minutes, but that's never true. You've got to do a lot of digging.
No, yeah. No, that was a quote that from the book that I saw. The paperwork didn't take long, the research did. And I thought that was key. That your process will go so much better when you apply if you do some healthy research ahead of time. So know what kind of information it's going to ask for before you even launch into the program, and start looking up that information. Who are you going to have as your references? Finding who those people are, going through where have you lived for the past 7 years, making sure you have those contacts and that information. I really think that research stage is very important.
Yeah. And always say, always keep a copy of it, because anything could happen. Even though you apply online and it's saved in a database, that database may not be here tomorrow. Anything could happen and wipe it out. Just keep a hard copy in a safe somewhere, or in a safe deposit box, somewhere you can get to it in case you have to fill it out again.
Yeah, no. And, I think that's key, because the systems of record change when it comes to the clearance process too. And I think that's you do a great job in the book of staying up to date with the terminology and the changes, because we kind of make fun of government oftentimes for being pretty slow in terms of movement. And in a lot of ways they are. And we've talked at Clearance Jobs about how the national security framework is from 1947, but a lot of the policies and things are changing. So we went from eQuip to now eApp. And so just because what was there yesterday might not be there tomorrow. And yeah, I never like to put all of my trust in a database of record and assume that everything is just going to transfer and it's all going to auto populate there later. Put together your own records and make sure you can access the information you need.
Yeah. So if you're like me and you've moved all your life, every 2 years, my dad was in the Army, then I joined. I was in for 20 years. And when you have a history of moving every 3 years, you're going to be filling out a lot of residence information, a lot of school information, a lot of job information, and you're never going to remember all those phone numbers, addresses, people. And so just keep good data, keep good details, so that if anything changes, you can go back to it.
Yeah, and you talk a lot, again, a big part of the book is just providing clarity about this process. So what do you think is one of the biggest misconceptions people have, maybe about obtaining a clearance, or what the clearance process looks like from either a company or candidate perspective?
Well, one, as I already mentioned, was, I have a bad past. Can I get a clearance? That was one. The other one was, a lot of people believe you have to pay for it. I was on a show one time, somebody's podcast, and I mentioned that, no, you do not have to pay for it. It's a sunken cost provided by the taxpayer. And they were stunned. And I just felt like I had told somebody a lie, because they convinced me I was wrong almost, because they were so adamant that, no, you have to pay for it. No, companies do not have to pay for it. The individuals do not have to pay for it. And it's probably a really good thing that that's in place, so we don't have fraud and we don't have ethics issues. The only way to get a clearance is to have a contract that requires it.
Yeah, I know there's always that debate about, is that a good thing? But I look and you see, it verifies and supports this whole idea that a security clearance is an inherently government function. It's something that, access to classified information is based on need to know. I feel like the fact that you can't just get your own security clearance just verifies that. You really have to have the need to know, and it's within the realm of the government. And again, there's pros and cons to everything, but it also ties back to something that we have to say a lot at Clearance Jobs, is that getting a clearance is not a right, it's a privilege. And so it's the government giveth and the government taketh away. And so that's why knowing what's in this book is important. And I thought it was interesting too, because you have half of the book relates to before you get the clearance. Half of the book relates to after you have the clearance, whether it's a facility or an individual security clearance. Do you think there's a misconception there? Do people forget that once they have this access to classified information, that there are still, obviously, there are obligations that go along with that?
I don't know if the reason I did that is, I called the Insider's Guide, because the people looking outside, I just remember the first time I was able to work on classified work, how unimpressive it seemed. I was expecting James Bond stuff and everything, but it's work, and it's work that needs to be protected so that we can keep our technological edge. And but I wanted to show people that, you know, once you get your clearance, there's another side to it. Help them identify the work that they would be doing, and also provide a little warning that, you know, you've been selected to get a security clearance because you are trustworthy. Now your life has changed. You've proven that you're capable of getting that security clearance and protecting classified information. Now you need to keep that up. Your life has now changed. Any From now on, people are going to be looking at you, assessing you. You're responsible for assessing yourselves and doing self-reporting. I think self-reporting might be an interesting concept to people on the outside. Why would I self-report? Well, you get reinvestigated every 5 years, and if they find something that you didn't tell them, that could be considered lying or fraud, depending on the reason why you didn't tell them.
And so again, if you're just joining us now, this is Lindy Kaiser, Senior Editor of Clearance Jobs, joined by Jeffrey Bennett, who wrote The Insider's Guide to the Security Clearance Process, which was our July book club book. If you do have a question, please throw it in the chat. Again, this is The Insider's Guide to the Clearance Process. We're talking to a security clearance insider right here today. So if you have questions for Jeff about the clearance process, don't hesitate to ask. Katie did jump in and she asked, what's been the biggest change in the process since you first obtained a clearance?
I think the biggest and best change happened actually a few years ago, and that was putting it online. Throughout my Army career, every time I would be up for a security clearance review, I would have to fill out that SF-86 all over again. We did it from scratch every single time. It wasn't like adding information on, because back then, before the computers, you had the hard copy, and it's like a ticking clock. During the past 10 years, has this ever? Well, 10 years later or 5 years later, your 10-year mark has moved, and so now you need a new piece of paper. And so I really love the fact that it is online. And some of the other changes that I've noticed are really transparent, that I've only noticed because of research or talking to people like Lindy, or being asked to research things on security clearances, things that I don't see, but if I research into it, I see I get to see behind the curtain a little bit.
Yeah. Well, that's an interesting thing too, that always I feel like at Clearance Jobs, a big part of what we do is obviously kind of covering things that are just, it's not classified, it's public information, but there's just, the government obviously is not great at self-promotion or even necessarily about clarity of process. So there's just a lot of these misconceptions, and just trying to be like, hey, you know, yeah, being kind of an internet sleuth and saying, oh yeah, that term does exist, or that process does happen, or there is a government policy for that. You just might not find out about it very readily. And so Jill jumped in and asked, this is another great question. What are some of the key things that people forget to self-report?
Wow. Some of the things I was just thinking about what those might be. Maybe life change events, such as getting married. You know, you might be preparing for your wedding, but you don't think about telling your FSO. That's a life change event. Visiting foreign countries. Sometimes it depends on, I guess, where you work, because sometimes larger, more mature places where you work who have mature processes will make sure and remind you every single time, every move you make, that you need to self-report some things. But a lot of the administrative stuff is what I call administrative self-reporting. Your foreign travel, you might overlook reporting that on accident. More purposeful things are, maybe some significant life events, such as maybe that one-time DUI or one-time drug use that you might be coerced into some drug use, or some little bit of too much drinking and driving, or something, and you're just shocked. When that happens, I recommend, they're going to find out. You might survive the next few years until your reinvestigation comes up, and then they'll just pull police records. I always recommend self-reporting. I have a buddy who is a security def, defense lawyer for security clearances, and he always asks that people get before you even talk to your FSO. His advice is talk to me first. So if you have somebody you trust who is a lawyer, they will help you report that in the best possible way.
Yeah, I think that's key too, that there are people out there that are willing to help folks through this process. So obviously Clearance Jobs is a great resource to go to and look for information, but there are security clearance consultants and attorneys. And if you have those questions and if this career is important to you, it's probably worth, investing the time and money and getting help from a professional or asking an expert. And again, especially rather than just opting yourself out of a career, or again, making the mistake of not reporting something. The DUI comes up all the time. And what I always say is in Washington, D.C., unfortunately, or however, there are plenty of people who get a one-time DUI. And again, what the government's looking for is a pattern of behavior. But you'll have a bigger issue if you fail to report that, because, then that becomes that's a character issue, not a clearance issue. And that's more likely to lose you the clearance.
Yeah. And some of the research that you've put me on, on these articles, I've seen a lot of people who have broken patterns of bad behavior documented that and were able to obtain a clearance once they got looked at with the whole person concept. It is possible to overcome some pretty significant events.
And so another thing that comes up too that we talk about, and this is kind of in the weeds nuance, but investigation versus adjudication. You walk through that a little bit in the book. What is the difference between those two processes? What's going on with investigation and adjudication?
Okay. Yeah, the investigators are there to take your SF-86 and start looking. It gets sent from the FSO to the appropriate government agency where they conduct the investigation. And they will look into your past, pull the records, and get everything together and they don't make an assessment, they just put the facts together. And then maybe it's comparable to lawyers before a trial, a civil trial or a legal trial, where they put their cases together and present it to the judge. Now, the adjudicator is the judge, and they are going to make decisions based solely on the national security, the impact of national security. And they're going to weigh that whole person concept. The FSO and the investigators don't make a judgment. They just gather the facts and make sure that it's investigated thoroughly. And the adjudicator will actually look at the whole person and make that decision on whether or not to get that award that security clearance based on what they know. And sometimes they may not have enough information, and that's up to the applicant, because there is no defense lawyer there. The applicant is responsible for putting all that information up front in the SF-86, all the documentation. They can submit that during the process. And then if there's not enough information, the judge may give a negative favor or negative ruling. However, there is a process where the applicant can appeal that ruling, and many have done so and won just because they needed to add some more information.
So if you're just joining us again, if you have a question about the security clearance process, we are going over Jeffrey Bennett's Insider's Guide to the Security Clearance Process right now. It was our July book club book. It comes in this great format if you're like me and you're a grandma and you like to read the books on the paper. But I was just telling Jeff, the ebook version would be a great option to have, just because you have a ton of links in here. And I know you're frequently updating the information that's in there. So just a great, if your company has security officers, or you're like, hey, we want to give a resource out to our cleared personnel so that maybe we don't see all of these mistakes in the clearance process, the ebook version is a great option too for companies even to purchase in bulk and have their employees use, just because there is a lot of really good information, and it's changing. So can you maybe speak to that? Because for me, again, having covered this for a long time, the past year has been almost surprising in terms of the improvements that have been made in processing times and in the clearance process, and kind of the overhauls that they're doing for Trusted Workforce 2.0. Has anything that's happened in the past year or two kind of surprised you as someone who's worked in this space for decades?
I am really surprised with the streamlining effort. and it's a pleasant surprise, that the government is looking at streamlining the issue. They took the issue seriously, and they talked about it a little bit, but as I've been keeping up with clearance jobs, they're actually putting things into effect. They're working these changes. There's reports coming back that the security clearance investigations are now returning back to normal or faster than they used to be. So I'm really looking forward to that, so that people can get back to work or start work sooner than they could, because it impacts businesses. If you're a company, you take on an uncleared person while you wait for their security clearance to be approved, it could take a year or more, and you are taking that person on at your own risk. And so getting this information back keeps our industry going.
Yeah. No, and I think what the information here, and you've mentioned several times about kind of the role of security officers and how important security officers are. And this is always kind of a point. I worked for the federal government for several years and never knew who my CSO or cognizant security, officer was. There's always just sometimes this disconnect. And again, the only way I realized there was a person doing that is when I realized I was working in the Pentagon without a security clearance, which is a story I've told here before, which is always one of those funny, her security clearance was never processed. Whoops. And so then they processed it quick. And then I knew that I had someone that had this job. But until then, I didn't even know about the role. And that's something you've written about a lot on clearance jobs. What is the role of an FSO, which is specific to contracting companies? And I think that role, I'm biased though, is super important. And you can see like the effectiveness of cleared employees in maintaining classified information and preventing insider threats. I think there's a correlation there between the FSOs. So can you maybe speak to that, the role of an FSO or the importance of an FSO in a company?
Lindy, can you hear me?
I can. Did you lose me?
I can't hear you. I lost audio somehow.
Oh no, I can hear you. Can't hear me at all?
Let's see.
Technical issues in the realm of coronavirus. I'll keep chatting while Jeffrey works on that. But for me, again, I'm fully capable of answering my own question. Jeffrey has written about the role of the FSO on the clearance job site before. So I just always emphasize for folks, if you are applying for a clearance, get to know your FSO. Make sure if you're a cleared employee, having a relationship with your FSO is a good idea. And then if you are an FSO, know the importance of your job and the human aspect of relating to those individuals. Can you hear me yet, Jeff? We can still hear Jeff. We're coming close to our time to wrap up anyway, so we might go ahead and wrap it up here if Jeffrey can't hear me. But again, I would definitely check out the book. We have an amazing August book club book. I'm not gonna promo it now. You're gonna have to wait and check out the clearance job site next week. But at that time, you can find out more about our August book club pick. And again, we will be giving away free copies of our August book. It's different than the Insider's Guide to the Security Clearance Process. Just shows the diversity of titles we have here at Clearance Jobs. You name it, we will read it. So again, this month we read the Insider's Guide to the Security Clearance Process. Jeffrey Bennett, he's written dozens of articles on the Clearance Jobs news site. So if you have questions about the clearance process, obviously clearancejobs.com should always be the first place you look. So check out Clearance Jobs. You can find articles written by Jeffrey Bennett. You can find more information about the Insider's Guide to the Security Clearance Process, which is available in hard copy, Kindle, ebook format, great desk reference, good for companies, good for security officers, and good for candidates. Can you hear me yet, Jeffrey?
So I've apparently lost audio, and I'm so sorry I can't hear. But I am trying.
Well, like we have to test our lip reading abilities. I was on a call earlier. Katie Keller will know. I was on a call with Katie, and every once in a while I would lose the audio for like a split second. It was like my Wi-Fi couldn't keep up. But it was a good like brain exercise to see if I could actually lip read. And I could do it a little bit, but I'm going to work this skills to work on in the age of coronavirus. lip reading, because sometimes your audio is going to fail. You're going to need to troubleshoot. Happens to me all the time. Again, thank you, Jeffrey, for joining us. Hopefully he could hear that.
Much. I appreciate being here.
Insider's Guide to the Clearance Process. Read more and check out more at Clearance Jobs. If you have other questions, throw them in the chat here and we will answer them later. Thank you again, everyone, for joining.